All right, so we're going to put this up on YouTube, and we'll see if there's anybody besides you and me that join us.
Just you and I?
At this point, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Is my little picture box supposed to turn black when you start speaking, or am I supposed to be able to see that picture the whole time?
Your picture or my picture?
The picture on my screen here.
Yeah. It's the way it works. There should be a picture of me and a picture of you.
Yeah.
And then whoever's talking should have the box framed in yellow. And the people who aren't talking should have no frame. And if someone's making noise, then they'll have they might have a little yellow line under their picture. But can you see me?
Yeah, I can see you clearly.
Yeah.
And I can see myself pretty good too, but last time I was on, when you started speaking, mine went black.
Oh, that's weird. That's strange. That shouldn't happen, but you know.
That shouldn't happen. Okay. Well, my son was going to help me with it, but I said, well, maybe it's not supposed to appear when we're in a meeting.
Oh, you know, there's two options. You can, if you go to the top right hand corner of your screen,
yeah,
you can, if you roll over it with your, your finger or something, are you using a computer or a tablet? Jerry, are you using a computer?
Yeah, I see those two things on the corner of my screen.
A speaker view or gallery view. So speaker view would mean that the person who's talking has the whole screen to himself. Gallery view means that everyone has a little box.
Oh.
So you probably want gallery view. That way you can see, see how people are seeing you. So like if you make a funny face, you know that you've made a funny face.
Well, anything can happen,
Yep, absolutely. All right, so we'll wait for a few more minutes, and then if no one else shows up, you and I can have a discussion about this guy, Roger Scruton. And I thought it would be nice to step back a little bit from Passover and coronavirus, and just get to some more what's the word? More global questions. Just get back from a little bit of our craziness. But someone's here. Let's see. 18572 is here. Hello. Who's on the phone with us? I don't know who that is. If you can hear us, let us know, and we can welcome you. Otherwise, you'll just listen to us, which is also fine. All right, so I think we'll get started. Oh, here's somebody else. We'll wait for a moment for this person to get on. Hello.
Hi.
Who's this?
This is Sandy Greenberg.
Hi, Sandy. How you doing?
I'm doing well, and you?
Hanging in there, all things considered. Kind of a crazy time. But Jerry is here. Jerry Hogan.
Jerry.
And then we also have another person, but they haven't identified themselves yet. So,
Okay.
all right. So I'm hoping at some point they'll figure out how to do that, and they can tell us who they are. But I think I will wait one more minute, I think, and just hang out and see if anyone else ends up feeling like joining us. And
Okay.
I had a couple more people who had expressed interest, but you know, when push comes to shove, sometimes it's not so easy to get on. So we'll see what happens.
It was very easy to get on,
Oh,
really.
I'm glad. I think it's, you know, I mean, once you're used to it, I think once you do it once, you realize that it's pretty easy, but the first time can be a challenge. So,
Oh, of course.
hello, and there's Harleen. Hello. One more person. Hello, Harleen. Ah, she just walked away.
No, I'm here.
Oh, good. So this is Jerry, who lives at 100 Center Street. And on the phone, we've got Sandy Greenberg, who's also at 100 Center. And then we have another person on, I guess on the phone, I'm not quite sure, but I don't know who that is because they haven't identified themselves. Let me see if I can chat. Oh, and there's Barbara.
Hi.
Hello, Barbara. How are you?
Hi,
Hi.
Bob. Hi, Harleen.
And Barbara, Jerry, and Sandy lives at 1550 Beacon.
I'm sorry?
I'm just introducing you, Barbara, to
Thanks.
the two people from 100 Center Street who are on the call. And then, and Jerry, we have Jerry Hoagland and Sandy Greenberg. Jerry is the man you see with the glasses, and I mean, the other man that you see with the glasses.
Oh, okay.
And Sandy is on the phone. So, and in case you haven't picked up on it yet, I'm just gonna let you all know that I've shaved off my beard in order to make the mask correctly. So there are people who are very disappointed and people who are very pleased with my new appearance. It reminds me of when.
The only one who has to be pleased is you.
What?
The only one who has to be pleased is you.
I agree. But you know, Sandy, it's a remarkable thing. You know, I never realized that that beards, like babies, seem to be something that is just a magnet for unsolicited opinions and advice. I never understood it. I never even knew it. I still don't understand it, but I you know, it's just very interesting how many people.
They have nothing more to think about.
Maybe not, I don't know, but the number of people who told me, oh, you know, Jim, I love your beard, or Jim, oh, you were such a good looking man before you had that beard.
Oh, that's nice, right? That made you feel good for the day, right?
It was like, boy. You know,
Well, I liked it, but not because it made any difference in your handsomeness.
right. Well, that's what I figured. I figured, you know, you kind of look the way you look, but I liked it. I tell people that I liked it because it gave me something to take care of. You know, I haven't had hair since my early 20s. So having something to, you know, to groom, to comb, to, you know.
And it's a cause of conversation too.
Right, it is always a good conversation piece. So anyway, but yeah, it reminds me.
Beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Absolutely, 100%. No, there's a whole category of people, and I do think that this is true. I mean, I think that, I think it's probably generally true, and the people who say this about themselves are just sort of probably more this way than other people. But that, you know, you really find beauty in people that you care about, and so so when sometimes people don't, sort of see the beauty in someone until they get to know them, and then they can sort of see the beauty. But it reminds me of what Leonard Cohen said once about an outfit he had on a record album, and he said I never looked better and never looked worse, depending on your politics. So that was pretty funny. All right, so we should get started. Oh, dude, you were there the whole time. My son is here. I didn't even realize. So I guess, did I wake you up? Okay. All right, so we're gonna do this. All right, we'll put this up on the screen. All right. Hold on one second. All right. No, I don't think that's going to work. All right. We're going to try again.
I just went out.
We're going to try again. All right. I'm going to play with that a little bit more. Okay. All right. So here's the article that we're reading. So it's so interesting. I was actually thinking about this guy the other day. He's a philosopher, Roger Scruton. I guess he died in January, which I didn't hear about when it happened. I just found this article today. But I remember reading a book of his, sort of an introductory book about philosophy, and really, really appreciating it, and saying to myself, and this must have been Monday, saying to myself, oh,
Today is Monday.
well, I'm sorry?
Today is Monday.
Oh, I'm
This
sorry.
was last.
I meant must have been last week. I'm all mixed up, Sandy. It must have been Saturday, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, I was thinking to myself as I was walking out my door, oh, I should dig out that book and have another look at it, because, I've been enjoying talking about philosophical topics with residents. And so, I should look up that book. And lo and behold, this morning I'm poking around looking for an article for this. And here is this man, Roger Scruton, who has died, and this really interesting article about him, because, and this is sort of an interesting topic for me in general, because I find myself very often in positions where I realize that I want to hold on to things, and so in that sense, I'm sort of a conservative, but in other ways, of course, I'm as in a political sense, I'm not very conservative at all. So this article sort of made a little sense to me. Excuse me one second. My dog is very looking at me. What do you need that you don't have? Just affection? All right. Do you want everyone to admire you? Okay. Everyone can admire you. Everyone who has a screen can admire you.
I'm going to interject. There's a Yiddish proverb that says, "Mitzich nehmt garnished." With you, when you die, you take nothing.
Yes.
Only what's in your heart.
Exactly.
So if you're a hoarder or one who saves, I did a lot of antiquing.
Yeah.
You never see a U-Haul following a hearse.
No, you never do. You never do. But that's not the kind of thing that I like to hold on to. That's not exactly what I meant. So I'm glad you brought that up, Sandy, because I completely agree with you. Although I am someone who doesn't like to get rid of things. I don't think I'm quite a hoarder, but I definitely am a pack rat. But no, what I meant is mainly traditions and songs, in a Jewish context, liturgy, in a political context, institutions that have been built and seem very valuable. That kind of a conservative.
I'm going to interject as well. I went to a shiva last night virtually.
To a what?
That
Oh,
was
Shiva.
a virtual
Shiva.
Shiva call.
Yeah.
You see, traditions have to change.
Absolutely.
Now,
Absolutely. Well, that's actually, we'll get into that in this article, I think, which is really, I think, very important about, you know, what, I don't think that a conservative in general is someone who wants nothing ever to change, right? You know, and the example here would be conservative Judaism, right? Even though I'm not a conservative rabbi, right? The idea of conservative Judaism is not that it's, you know, not that Judaism never changes, right? But that it you know it holds on to things that are valuable. It just doesn't, you know, change for the sake of willy-nilly change. But let's go ahead and have a look at this. But before we do this, has anyone heard of Robert Scruton besides me? Okay, so I'll take that as a no. This is what he looked like. He wasn't very old. He was only 75. But he was a sir, so I guess he was knighted. All right, so Sir Roger Scruton, who died this month at age 75, a long-standing and dear friend of mine. By the way, this is a philosophy professor, I think at Princeton. We'll find at the bottom of the article if I'm right about that. Although we represented different philosophical schools, Roger leaning in a Kantian direction, I being a dyed-in-the-wool Aristotelian, our interests and ultimate conclusions often overlapped. I learned an enormous amount from reading his work and even more from our conversations. So I just want to point out that I only have the vaguest idea of what he means by a Kantian versus an Aristotelian. I'm not a philosophy professor, so I don't have this information sort of in my head. I did poke around, as I said in my email, and I found an article that explains it a little bit. So if we have time at the end of our session, I'm happy to try to explain what little bit I can about that distinction. It's actually pretty interesting in its own right. Okay, so Roger was widely known as a conservative philosopher. Indeed, the most important Anglo-American conservative thinker of his generation. It is true that he was a conservative. It's also true that he was a philosopher. Many of his philosophical views can truthfully be labeled conservative. But to honor the truth in full, it is necessary to explain, with respect to any particular view Roger held, the sense in which it was conservative. Do so will show the important ways in which Roger defied stereotypes. So, right, so already we're seeing, right, that the word conservative can already have several senses, right? And there's probably some of those senses in which some of us would be comfortable, as well as some of them in which we might be less comfortable. I mean, and I'm talking about each person individually, not collectively. Like conservatives of all descriptions, Roger loathed and opposed communism, which he regarded as a soul-destroying abomination and not just as a failed promise of economic prosperity, and all forms of socialism. So he found little to like in the Labour Party of his native Britain, even in the Tony Blair era, or in the Democratic Party in the United States, even before its leftward lurch in the 21st century. Yet Roger was far from fully on board with the economic philosophy of the British Tories or the American Republicans, or the mainstream of the Anglo-American conservative movement. And just FYI, if anyone is ever interested in the shoes that I wear, you can see that's about the only thing I shop for online. So almost always you will either see those shoes or guitars in the advertisements. Hi, Ami, how are you?
Hi, sorry. Hey, Alexa, off. Alexa, off. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Alexa just, often refuses to obey. It can be really frustrating. All right. So Ami, we just got started talking about, and you can see on your screen, I've just gone through this. So in a nutshell, we're talking about Roger Scruton, who was a friend of the guy who's writing this article.
Who is the man who wrote the article?
His name is Robert George, and he's a legal scholar and a political philosopher. As I said, I believe at Princeton, but you don't have to trust me until we get to the bottom of the page. So Roger was a Kantian. Robert George is an Aristotelian, but they had a lot of overlap. So he was conservative, but not in any kind of a stereotypical way. So he really didn't like communism and socialism. So he wasn't a big fan of the Democratic Party or of the Labour Party in Britain. But he also was not much of a dyed-in-the-wool Tory or Republican. First, he believed that the free market enthusiasm of Margaret Thatcher and Milton Friedman made economic policy too central, relying on it too much to solve social problems and to shape society, which I guess is what he would say about communism. And actually, I think he makes this point later, so he won't make it now. Right. In this respect, he thought it shared an error with its great foe, Marxism. Right, that economic policy was going to be what brought about social change and the betterment of society. Second, though Roger believed in market mechanisms and fervently opposed central planning and what he saw as a dependency-inducing welfare state, he denied that the outcomes of free exchanges are automatically just. Liberty, while important, was for him only one important value among others like community and solidarity, order and decency, honor and faith. So, you know, when we get to the point where the only value, right, is liberty, especially freedom of trade and the free movement of money, right, that ends up not leading to justice, or at least it's not inherently just. And so he thought a variety of regulations may be needed and therefore justified to protect persons and valuable institutions of civil society. What Edmund Burke, and Roger was nothing if not a Burkean, called the little platoons that should play the lead role in promoting health, education, and welfare, and informing new generations in the virtues people need to thrive and contribute to society. Here, Roger joined the iconic American neoconservative Irving Kristol in giving capitalism only 2 cheers, perhaps actually no more than 1 3/4. All right, so I think this paragraph probably requires a little bit of unpacking. Okay, so what we have, right, is this, you know, in our current economic and political discourse, right, we have in the current administration a fervor to deregulate, right? The idea is to get rid of regulations because, you know, they kill business, they kill jobs, they diminish profits, whatever the reason. A recent example of this is the decision to suspend the environmental regulations that try to limit pollution during the time of the pandemic in order to reduce stress on business. And we've also seen in the current administration an indifference or even a hostility to the regular institutions of government. So just a kind of a very pertinent and topical example, right, is the famous decision by the Trump administration to do away with the pandemic planning part of the CDC at the beginning of 2019, which left us less prepared for the eventual pandemic that came around in 2020. So these, according to Edmund Burke was a was an English political writer in the late 18th century, and he was famously opposed to the revolutions, right, to the French Revolution and to the American Revolution, and he was an institutionalist, right, and a royalist, right, sort of classic conservative, right, and who felt that these various institutions, right, are the ones that should be leading the charge to promote all the virtues of society. So that would be universities, right? It would be social service agencies. It would be the healthcare system, and so on and so forth, obviously in different forms in different ages, and that it would be through these institutions that people would come to be able to contribute to society. Right, and so it was not all about business, not all about the freedom for money to be moving around. All right, Roger was willing at times to ally himself with classical liberals and even Austrian school libertarians in the struggle against communism, bravely leading seminars and building underground institutions in Soviet-dominated Eastern Europe. This is something I know almost nothing about, unfortunately. It sounds very interesting, but I can't say anything about it. But that should not obscure a profound intellectual moral difference. Roger rejected individualism in any serious sense. Nothing was more fundamental to his moral and political thought than the dignity of the human person. But he understood that to flourish, persons need relationships, beginning with the family. Right, and that's also something I think that's very, very important. Right, is there is an individualistic streak to the American character, right, that can lead, obviously, as it has in recent decades, to sort of an epidemic of isolation, especially among older people, but not just among older people. And so this emphasis on family and emphasis on human relationships, right? Family as a matter of human relationships, not family as a way to beat to beat the drum of cultural culture wars. Although I'm sure that he would probably be very willing to join join the more conservative side of those conversations. Okay, so
I'd like to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Because families are very complicated institutions.
Absolutely.
Many of us here at 100 Center Street enjoy the fact that we're our independence and we're not only relying upon the family.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that and I'm not going to argue that. I don't know that he would argue, right, that there should be no separation between parents and children and children and grandchildren and so on and so forth. I just I don't know his philosophy well enough to know that, but I do think that he also but the point is that independence is not the same thing as isolation from, right? And so people maintain relationships with family even in the context of very complicated family dynamics, right? There's
a Yiddish proverb that says, the man who has eaten doesn't believe the man who is hungry. And that just goes to show that the social positives, taking care of the poor, the person who has never experienced does not understand them.
Right.
Period.
It's just it's a struggle. I think it's a struggle that one can choose to engage. Right. I am very lucky. I have a good job even in this environment where millions and millions of people are losing their jobs. I have a place to live. I have food. I'm extremely grateful for that. But I am trying to through efforts of empathy to try to meet people who don't have all the things that I have, and try to help them in whatever way that I can. But it's always a struggle to do that. All right, so let's continue. Central to Rogers' disagreement with his more libertarian allies was his belief in unchosen, and in that sense, natural obligations, duties we have simply by virtue of being human and born into a certain family, community, or nation. We do not come into the world as bare individuals who can develop an identity entirely from scratch, right? And this is a very interesting, interesting way of thinking about this. Especially for people like me, who have undergone pretty fundamental transformations in their connections. I grew up Episcopalian, and now I'm Jewish, right? Does that mean that in some way I was denying or betraying, right, my natural obligations to the religion into which I was born? On the other hand, right, family, community, and nation, I feel like, those things I haven't really left. I feel the obligation to those things, and feel like I still do what I can to fulfill those obligations. And also it is true, right, that we are born into a particular context. That context sometimes changes, right? Some kids are born in one country and then move to another country, either because they're adopted or because their parents immigrate, or whatever the reason is, right? So we have all kinds of ways in which these things can change, and which raise questions about. That's why I think I do like the word unchosen much better than natural, because natural obligations make it seem like the ones that are chosen are somehow unnatural, as opposed to being chosen. Go ahead, Ami.
Do you think that a phrase that Jefferson used, self-evident, is cogent here?
Well, that's actually a really interesting question. Self-evident, sort of like the truths that we as Americans claim to find self-evident, right? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they're self-evident, because again, it feels to me. And it's a great question. I don't know the answer, Ami. Do you have a sense?
Well, Jefferson used it in terms of the pursuing happiness and individualism.
Right.
And I'm wondering here what the basis is. The phrase is unchosen.
Yeah.
So exactly what does it mean, unchosen, and where does unchosenness originate from?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I think, I haven't looked deeply into Scruton's philosophy, so I wouldn't be able to say just off the top of my head. But what I can say off the top of my head is that things that obligations are unchosen, in the sense that you are born into a particular family, and so you have some sort of obligation to that family. You have some sort of obligation to the community into which you are born, and that if you that you either need to fulfill those obligations, or you need to sort of make a choice not to, right? And so and I would imagine that a person who is coming at these conversations from a point of view of ethics and leading a good life would want to have some reason why they were going to choose not to fulfill those obligations. Like a good one, I think, would be you have parents who are abusive, and thus, they are not they are not fulfilling their unchosen obligations towards you. And in order to be safe, you need to remove yourself from that situation. I think that those, but that's of course an extreme example, but there may be other ones as well. And I think also that, and this is an interesting whole conversation about that business of self-evident, because he's not talking about obligations, he's talking about truths, right? Jefferson, I'm talking about here. Jefferson says that these things are truths that we hold to be self-evident. And I think that's I think from a looking at it from the perspective of truth, though that statement is pretty dubious. I'm not sure that those things are self-evident, but that's a whole nother conversation. All right, so let's.
Not really, because here you can apply the same logic to our obligations that are unchosen.
In what sense?
Right? If they're unchosen, then they're optional.
No, I think what he's saying, I mean, I think that all obligation, in a sense, all obligations are, you can decide that you're not going to fulfill them, right? So in that sense, all obligations are optional. But I mean, a good example right now, and this is, and again, this is a very complicated topic, right? Is the question of whether, we have an obligation right now to our community to practice social distancing and to reduce the amount of time that we spend in the company of other people, right? We have that obligation, right? It's not something that any of us chose, right? None of us, I think, would choose to practice social distancing as a sort of as a regular thing, barring people who prefer to be by themselves all the time. But most people, I would say, would not choose social distancing or quarantine. But we're in that situation right now, where to make the decision not to do that, right, is in a sense to not fulfill an unchosen obligation, if that makes any sense. But let's move on. So indeed, Roger was one of the leading philosophical defender of love of home and one's own, what he called oikophilia. Oikos, I guess, means, I don't know if it means home or if it means native place, but I do know that there is a kind of yogurt called oikos, which is Greek yogurt. So I'm assuming it must be like home style or something like this. Of course, as a humanist and a Christian, he understood duties to all of humanity, even duties of love, understood as being less about feeling and about willing, right? The idea that you should love your neighbor as yourself, right? The sort of classic Jewish and does someone have YouTube on?
What happened?
I don't know. I'm hearing a kind of an echo. Is there anyone?
Yes, when you put out the wing,
Let's see if that happened. All right. All right. All are brothers and sisters under the fatherhood of God, who made us all in his own image.
broken, say, he's taking this time. Oh. All right, I'll say, appreciate it.
All right, so someone was in Harley's apartment there, so I just muted her temporarily. All right, but Roger also held that one naturally and rightly has a special love for and duties towards members of one's family, tradition of faith, local community, and region, and fellow citizens. Right, this is sort of a fundamental set of obligations that we have to the sort of, if we sort of imagine our lives as concentric circles, right, with us right in the middle, and then our family right around that, and our friends around that, and then our community around that, our our faith tradition somewhere in that mix, right? Our larger region, and then our state, and maybe then our country, before we get to the world, right? That there's sort of a a way in which we have loyalty and obligations to the circles that are closer to the center than the ones that are on the outside, right? And I think what's interesting is that those things can often shift around, right? When I started working in Ukraine, it was a country I had no connection to whatsoever. After 6 years of working in Ukraine, I felt quite a bit of loyalty and quite a bit of a connection, and quite the sense of feeling like I wanted to do what I could to fulfill certain obligations to Ukraine. Not the kind of obligations that I have to my own country, but certainly a feeling of kinship and connection that sort of moved that community closer to the center of my circles. All right, so Roger's oikophilia and his rejection of multiculturalism, which he considered anti-cultural in that it melted the different cultures into a monoculture of contemporary, upscale, progressive ideology. Well, that's a whole mouthful. I mean, multiculturalism is a complicated topic, which but it often translates, I think, into sort of simplified distortion of it, right? Basically, that all cultures are exactly the same, all cultures are exactly equal, and we don't owe any special we have no special obligation to our own culture as opposed to other cultures. So it's sort of a radically leveling kind of an exercise that makes it very complicated. And I remember having a conversation when I chose to become a professor of Russian literature, and someone asked me why, and I said, well, I just find that it's the most most amazing literature I've ever read. And that person got very upset because she thought that some other kind of literature was that I was rejecting the value of other literatures by suggesting that that this one was the best. And I said, well, I'm not sure that I'm saying that, but just like you have certain affinities. But anyway, so
I want to interject because those affinities change over time.
Of course they change. I mean, for a lot of people they change. For other people they don't change. I mean, I think that's what complicates these things, right? Is that there are people who grow up and they grow up as homeboys and homegirls, and they grow up in an Irish American context, and they never really want to leave that context. That's where they're comfortable, that's where they belong. And then there's other people who grow up in a certain context and will go somewhere else, and they want to live in a different context. I think that happens all the time. And I also think, and this is what's I think interesting about this, right, is that there's an assumption if someone rejects multiculturalism, right, that they're rejecting the value of other cultures. And so I think this is why this paragraph is interesting, right? So his rejection of multiculturalism provoked ignorant and excitable people. They're not just ignorant, they're ignorant and excitable. Very interesting. To accuse him of xenophobia and racism, right? In fact, Roger respected other cultures a great deal more than most progressives of my acquaintance do. He learned Arabic in order to read the Quran, and he admired the tradition transcending contributions of the great medieval Islamic philosophers. He made careful, in-depth studies of Hindu and other Eastern traditions of faith, precisely in search of the wisdom he regarded them as possessing. Roger often explained his conservatism with a soundbite, which naturally oversimplified matters. He told the story of watching protesters in the streets from the window of his apartment in Paris in May 1968, and realizing that building things of value, communities, societies, nations, legal and economic systems, institutions of civil society, that building these things is hard and it takes time, while destroying them is easy and often accomplished in a flash. Right? We're seeing that now, right? And we're seeing that in our current situation, right? How easily things can seem to fall apart, right? And there's sort of a question of, well, can we put these things back together again? It was then, he said, that he became or realized that he was a conservative, right? 1968 is, 50 something years ago. So he was a young man at that point. He was only 23. So that's an interesting way of sort of realizing that you're conservative, not right because of this or that political stance, right, which might follow from being a conservative, right, but the primary emphasis on conserving, right, on making sure that these things of value do not simply get washed away. Moreover, he recognized that the most important things people build, even more important than the cathedrals and great works of art and music that he loved so much, are not primarily the result of planning. They develop organically over time, with trial and error, as the work of many hands. An example is the common law of England, right? Another example closer to my area of expertise is the Jewish legal and literary tradition, right? The Talmud is a compendium, right? It's not a book that you read cover to cover that's been put together by a single person, right? Rather, it's something that developed over centuries, and that's the sort of framework of Jewish law. It's never just one person putting these things together, and common law in England is similar, right? It's constantly being mushed, right? Recognizing this, conservatives should, he argued, seek to protect these things against those who would tear them down out of a misguided zeal for what they saw as the demands of liberty, equality, social justice, or even the free market, right? So you can see that here from a political perspective, right? He wants to guard against what we might call the left and the right, right? Rather than protecting from liberals or conservatives, right? He's a conservative who wants to, so there may be a desire for equality, but let's not, he would say, tear down the institutions of society in order to have some form of liberty that will become meaningless outside of the context of the institutions which make life possible. The conservative can cheer moderate reforms because organic things do grow and therefore change, right? This is sort of the for me, this is the genius of Judaism before the split between Reform and Orthodox, right? Is that of course things changed, right? There was always going to be change over time, right? And as soon as there was a split between the reformers wanting to make changes really, really fast, and the Orthodox who decided that all changes were wrong, right? And no change was possible, right? Then you ended up in a situation where, both are sort of a little bit off. And so I do think that that was the origin of the term conservative Judaism, right? To find a middle ground between the radical reformers and the radical non-reformers of the Orthodox. All right, so the conservative can cheer moderate reforms because organic things do grow and therefore change. Also, just to point out, right, that this is very much at odds with the current legal theory among many right-wing politicians and thinkers in this country right? The idea of I forget exactly how they put it. I'm sorry, I can't remember. But that the idea is that the Constitution only means what it means, right? That there's an original meaning to the Constitution, and that could never evolve, right? I think it's a very dangerous doctrine, and it is held by many of our right-wing justices on the Supreme Court. I would say that those people are not conservatives in the Roger Scruton sense, right? Because a true conservative understands that things actually do evolve over time, as societies do, not just technologies, right? Okay. That spirit, by the way, made Roger an ardent but old-fashioned and therefore moderate conservationist, a kind of green Tory. What we used to have in this country, right? Remember who it was that set up the EPA? Was not was not. I'm sorry. Was not Ocasio-Cortez, but it was Richard Nixon, right? I said that. No, I was trying to think of. Thank you. My son was telling me who it was, so he's very helpful that way. He knows history better than I do. So he believed responsible stewardship of the natural order crucial. He thought that good stewardship begins with regard for the local landscape and architecture. Left-wing philosophers, heirs in a sense to 1789, right? 1789 is the date of the French Revolution, right? And those people would also consider themselves heirs of 1968 in Paris, right? The student revolts. Believe that philosophy's point is to chart how the world should be remade. In Marx's words, the philosophers have thus far merely interpreted the world. The point is to change it. As if to play the role of Marx's straight men for one of his pithiest lines, some conservative philosophers have sought to explain that the social world is as it is, or what it was until somehow the left changed it, because it had to be that way and cannot be substantially changed. Right? This idea that we're just talking about, this originalist doctrine, that that things should never, things can't change. It's impossible for things to change, and only evil people would make them change, right? Roger was a different kind of conservative philosopher. True, he did not think philosophy or anything else could usefully plan or radically reform the world. He was not a Marxist, even in that limited sense. There was none of the spirit of 1789 or 1968 in him. But he believed that philosophy can help us see the value of good, if imperfect things, communities, institutions that have grown up organically, and that it can show us why we should fight to preserve them and how we can make our own contribution to their development, sometimes even by way of moderate reforms. All right, so reactions.
Well, as a feminist, I think what you're missing here is validating women's rights and women's voices, and that goes all through Judaism.
Yes, I do think
Women,
right, go ahead.
I can do chapter and verse, but basically half the human race is not considered equal.
Yes,
period.
right. And that I do think that in the last in the last 200 years, but certainly in the last 50 years, right, there has been a radical reshaping of society that started with feminism and now is also involves gender, not just people who consider themselves women, but people who are in different gender categories. And I do think
Right, transgender, right.
right, or just gender non-conforming people, even if they're not trans, right? And so I think that, but I think there's a way, right, for feminism to be seen right, in a sense, as what's the word I'm looking for? Compatible with the kind of conservatism that's being described here, right? There's a way of saying that, you know, we think family is important, right? But we don't necessarily believe that a family only has one way to be constituted, right? That there can only be that sort of 50s, leave it to Beaver, father knows best kind of a family, right? That we can have all kinds of different families, right? And we don't all have to agree what constitutes a family, but we can have a conversation rather than sort of ending conversation about it by saying there's only one kind. Right, and I, for instance, there's even what's remarkable to me, Sandy, is the degree to which feminism has taken hold among modern Orthodox Jews, and the degree to which women are taking leadership roles in those communities in ways that would have been unthinkable even 10, 15 years ago, much less 25 years ago.
I think, excuse me,
Go ahead. Who's there?
that's Barbara, me.
Great, Barbara.
I'm sorry, I didn't really mean to interrupt you.
No, that's great.
I think that this conversation ties very directly into what he's talking about with naturally evolving institutions and so forth.
Right.
This is all, it has evolved from way back when women did have no voice whatsoever.
Right.
So
right.
I like his approach. I consider myself a flaming liberal, but I feel that I strongly agree with a lot of his ideas about protecting and maintaining good institutions that are already here.
Right. Or at least the good of those institutions.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Where there's, I mean, I do think that there's a tendency among a lot of people, and I'm not going to put, sort of left or right wing. I'm not going to sort of say that people like this are left or right. I just think that, there's something in the human, something in us as humans that has sometimes a tendency to want to just throw everything out, right?
Yes.
Just burn it down and start over, right? And I think that's one of the reasons we see God behaving that way in the Bible, right? And it's very, very interesting, right, that God has to listen to Moses, who says, if you burn it all down, I'm out of here too. So in that sense, God is the radicals of 1968, and Moses is Roger Scruton saying, let's keep something together. Ami, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I have an observation I would like to see what you say. This kind of philosophy, I also am very sympathetic to it, but it really comes out of a world that was changing more slowly than the world is changing now. The rate of technology is tremendous. Things are changing so quickly. And I guess my question is there time for things to evolve organically?
Right, right. I mean, that's a really interesting question. Sandy, what do you think?
Organically, I'll have to think about that. Slowly, it's not. You talked about how rapidly the position of women has changed in the past 15 or 20 years. 1922 is the first time you had a bat mitzvah.
Yeah.
And okay, I'm 83. The first time I was called for an aliyah was a cold winter morning, and it was the first time I was in shul on a Saturday, and I was called, and the woman, she was a cantorial student, and she said, haven't you had one of these before? And I looked at her and I said, I'm a woman, and I've been educated Jewishly since the time I'm 6.
Right.
It's a different world.
Absolutely. But I do think, though, that if you read a novel by Jane Austen, right, and then you read a novel by George Eliot, and then you read a novel by Joseph Conrad, you will see, right, that the world, on one hand, the world might be sort of recognizable one from the other, but you'll also notice pretty significant changes over time. I think that when people are living, right, the pace of social change can seem so overwhelmingly fast, right? But when we look at it from a historical point of view, that since at least since the 18th century, and maybe even um, since the Renaissance, right? We've had this sort of speeding up of changes, you know, driven by technology, driven by movements across countries, right? Driven by ideologies, right? And so there is a way in which things, you know, when you're in the midst of it, things seem to be a whirlwind. And also, I do think there are times when things are moving more quickly than they do at other times. But I don't know.
But the rate of change is really different than it was 30 years ago. I mean, this is true, but as you look at how quickly they're changing faster
Yeah.
and faster.
Yeah, the world is definitely moving quickly, and I do think a lot of that is the pace of technological change.
So my question is still there. Is
Yeah.
this philosophy of things, allowing things to evolve organically, really remain if the rate of change keeps as it
It
is?
is, and I'll tell you why. Because I think that the alternative, right? The alternative is either to let things die, right? Because it's because, you know, it's inconvenient for people, and some people in power, to have the slowing effects of these institutions, right? You know, or you know, that I think that the philosophy is sort of saying that there's no other way for things to change in a real way, right? The only way they can change is organically. That even if you were to put in, you know, and we see this in, you know, you know, in the history of communism, right? This desire to sort of have everything planned out ahead of time, right? This sort of quote unquote scientific 5-year plans, right? Were you know, didn't work out the way that people wanted them to, right? Because real life doesn't pay attention to your plan. Um, you know, the president, you know, decided that he was going to have a plan, right? That the coronavirus would be done by Easter, right? The coronavirus didn't do his plan. You know, so it's, you know, I think that this is not a, this is, I don't think that the philosophy that's saying that we should allow things just to develop organically. I think it's a philosophy that's saying that the world does change organically. And it doesn't always, I don't know if it's making a statement about the rate of change, right? It's just that we have to go out there and contribute to the society to make it change in the ways that we want it to change. We may disagree. You know, we may think that, you know, we shouldn't look at the world, even though we live in a nation that's largely Christian. We may not believe that we should sort of see everything through a Christian lens, not least of all because many of us are not Christian, right? The way that Scruton probably would hold, right? But that doesn't mean that we have any sort of fundamental disrespect for people of other religions, right? So I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting question. Anyway, we have to stop because I'm late for something else. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and maybe someday I'll try out my philosophical explanation skills and tell you what I learned about the difference between a Kantian and an Aristotelian. So.
Oh, that's easily. Just go to Google.
Yeah, well, right. Well, I went to Google, and it was not simple. I went down a number of rabbit holes before I finally found something that I could understand. So much of it was full of philosophical jargon that I couldn't follow it. but I finally found an article that was written in plain language. So, so all right.
Thank you.
Later. Bye-bye.
Jim,
Yeah. Oh, yeah, Sami. Yeah.
when you have a chance, I know you're really busy, get back to me about an article for this prototype.
Yeah. I think it's probably not gonna, it probably won't be something I can get to you before at least until after Seder night, but I'll.
Right, I understand, but get,
Yeah.
okay.
Sounds good.
I'll send you what I have so far.
Perfect. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Jerry.